Howdy all, grab yourselves a beer. It is time to talk some Path of Exile. And in this video, I want to talk about the 9 factors that I believe sabotage the Synthesis League. Let me start by saying that I personally have been having a blast this league. As a mid-level crafter, there's been huge niches to explore in the synthesis economy, to find ways to interact with the new crafting systems that have been brought out, and to both create powerful items and narrow niche items that are of interest. Additionally, the Nexus zones, and I'm talking both the memory fragments that you encounter while mapping or while in the axe, and also the ways that you then go back into them inside the Nexus, have been a lot of fun as just ultra high density zones. I think they feel like running through a zone in the memory Nexus feels about as dense as running a map during during an event that's got lots of extra mods, and the map is 8 mods, and you've got a couple of sextants affecting it. Like the monster density is insane. I don't for a second regard this league personally as a shit league the way that I would Bestiary, or as a mediocre one, as a league that was mediocre with major flaws like Betrayal. But ultimately, firstly, I need to accept that my position is a minority here, and that it's been pretty negatively reviewed by most players, at least by most of the louder voices on Reddit, and judging also by the comments that are made on my videos on YouTube, I would say that it does seem to be a majority opinion that the league has been bad. Now, I think that there's been a few specific reasons for that, and I think that the first and most important one is that the league suffered immensely because it was pushed live a week before it was ready. And this poisoned the well by giving the league an awful first impression. Whereas something like Incursion, that I think actually Incursion was a less impressive league than Synthesis has been, at least my opinion, Incursion went live at a point where it was polished and it was finished. It did have a couple of flaws, and it did have a couple of design decisions that may not have been the ones that I would have liked to have seen, but it did functionally work, and you could play. There weren't particularly many bugs, and there weren't glaring design deficiencies that caused major dramas. But firstly, I want to talk about the major positives to the league first, because this is a video about the bad things. Let's get the good things out of the way. Firstly, the memory fragments, accepting a flaw that I'll get to later with decay, the memory zones are what I would term a breach-like zone. This is a term that I'd use for anything like Elver's incursions inside maps, breaches themselves, abysses, any sort of event within normal gameplay that causes an extreme rush of monsters to attack you at once, that causes basically a very intense short fight, after which you receive some sort of explosive reward. Now, I'm calling them breach-like zones because the first ones that were introduced to the game were in the Breach League, and obviously everyone that watches my videos, I think I generally cater to people that are already up to maps, so I think you've probably experienced breaches as an example of a very short and sharp dose of intense chaos. That you get monsters attacking you from everywhere when you hit one, when you interact with a breach, and it's all craziness. There's also something else that I think is very positive with this league, and that is that there are durable rare monsters that actually live long enough to use their major telegraphed and special attacks that they have on them. This is something that has been missing for a while, and this is something that will only really affect power gamers and semi-power gamers. You'll notice that you generally don't care much about what a monster is unless it has an on-death effect. So you're running through the game, and then all of a sudden you're going through the Delve Mines. You then, boom, you get surprised by a Heralds of the Obelisk pack. And suddenly you've got this moment of tension where for 3 seconds you're in extreme danger. Everything comes down to your reactions within those 3 seconds. If you play with skill, you get away safely. If you don't, the Heralds of the Obelisk take you out. But that's not a factor of the monsters themselves. That's an after-death effect that they leave behind. Synthesis has added a number of extremely dangerous monster abilities that you need to react to, but that occur while a monster is still alive and that can be interrupted by killing the monster. However, at least on my character, I'm still playing Cold Damage or Coldest. I'd sort of designed them with the intention of transitioning into Molten Strike, Hand of Wisdom and Action reasonably early in the league, and I was just having so much fun with the Cold Damage or Coldest that I haven't done that yet. But my character's got enough damage to take down all of the major endgame bosses. You know, I've killed Uber Elder several times, and if you want to see my terribly ugly attempts at it, you can see the videos that I've made. I have got a deathless kill that was unfortunately not recorded. But, you know, like I'm taking down Uber Elder, taking down Shaper, taking down the Shaper Guardians, including with fairly nasty mods sometimes, usually not dying on the Shaper Guardians or Shaper, and, well, usually dying on Uber Elder, but that's... I've got enough damage for it. That's just because I'm making mistakes. In short, I've got enough damage to deal with the game, but I do not have enough damage to trivialize these monsters. And I think this is a really good thing for the game, and it's about time that we started seeing more rare monsters that are worth killing, but that also have enough hit points that they pose a threat beyond their on-death effects. And that's something Synthesis League does extremely well. And the next thing that I've really liked about Synthesis is the way that it splits crafting. And you'll notice that I've got the fossils page up on the video at the moment. Fossil prices on the PoE.Ninja trade aggregation website. And one of the things that Synthesis does is it splits crafting into two distinct parts. Firstly, crafting a base with desired implicits, then perfecting the explicit mods as a second step. And this allows a point where there's a really clear break in crafting. Players can find a niche where they specialize in one part of this crafting process. So for instance, maybe you're someone that's done as much research into the synthesized crafting as I have, and in that case, you can then go ahead and experiment with things like crafting items with two amazing implicit modifiers that you can then maybe you're not wealthy enough in the league to actually finish these crafts yourself, but you can then sell them on to other players who can then do that. Now, I've pointed out fractured fossils here as something that is tremendously expensive in this league. There's two reasons for that. One of them is that some of these items that you can craft are so incredibly powerful that they are actually worth using as fractured fossil services. Something that has generally only been done in the past with helmets that have had premium labyrinth enchants on them. In this league, I know I purchased a fractured fossil service early in the league, back when fractured fossils were 2.4 to 2.5 exalts. I purchased a fractured fossil service on someone else's amulet that had two implicit modifiers. The first one being 15% increased intelligence, and the second modifier being plus 1% damage per 15 intelligence on your character. Now that 15% increased intelligence applies to your entire character, so all intelligence bonuses from your passive tree, from your gear, not just to the amulet itself. And I wound up with an extraordinarily good Hand of Wisdom in Action, energy shield based amulet that I haven't actually used yet because I haven't done the transition that I was planning on doing. But this is something that I think has been a really positive thing to this league, that there's just a whole lot of new crafting niches to explore, both for the extreme power gamer, economy-focused power gamer, who'd be people like the person that I purchased the Fractured Fossil service from, and also for players that are at my level of crafting, where you can experiment with getting one specific focusing on getting one specific implicit on an item, or even people that are a bit more casual that are looking to get just something that may not be a premium implicit, but just get something that makes their item considerably better than it otherwise would be. I think this has had a fascinating effect on the metagame of this league. Not something that I'll say was completely without problems, and there's been a recent Reddit post that showcased one of the problems that I felt has come up, where some of the interactions with fractured fossils, I think, and fractured items are pretty bad. But in any case, I think in general, the splitting of crafting into two parts has been good. Having people that can specialize in crafting bases, and then having people that can specialize in buying those bases at a later stage and then creating a masterpiece from them. This is, I feel, more interesting than just having people that specialize in acquiring bases. So, you're running Uber Elder, and then eventually Uber Elder drops an item level 86 Shaper Hubris Circlet, which you go, oh yes, that's what I wanted to see. And then you then sell that on to a crafter who then creates a masterpiece from it. The other thing I thought has been really good, and this is where the currency tab comes up, currency windows on PoE.Ninja, is that there's been a lot of economic changes that I think have actually benefited more casual players. I want to start with the Exalt to Chaos ratio. You'll notice that it's been remarkably low for most of this league. Now, let's leave aside the sharp increase that took place from about April 18 onwards, and look at the sort of prices that were seen before that. Now, most people treat the economy in Path of Exile as being Chaos Orb based. I treat it as Exalt based, and so rather than saying, where you can see that the value of an Exalted Orb is 131 Chaos Orbs, I actually think of that differently. I think of that as one Chaos Orb is worth 7.5 milli Exalts, so 7.5 thousandths of an Exalt. The reason I think of the economy in this sense is that Exalted Orbs are the most undersupplied currency in the game. So they're the one where demand most exceeds supply, and in that sense, they're the one that has the most stable value throughout a league generally. Now, Exalted Orbs have been devalued by this league, and random currencies have been strengthened. And so what I mean by that is that there's been a whole series of currencies, like Scouring Orbs this league, not considering the last couple of days, because again, as I say, Exalted Orbs have strengthened at the expense of pretty much everything else in the basically during Easter. But prior to Easter, we saw Scouring Orbs, which, casual players loot lots of Scouring Orbs and don't have much use for them generally. They've gone from 2 milli Exalts last league, so 500 Scouring Orbs equals 1 Exalted Orb, up to spending most of this league at 7, 8 or 9 milli Exalts. So that's 140 to 110 Scouring Orbs trading for 1 Exalt. Chaos Orbs are up from 5.5 milli Exalts to 8 until very, very recently. Now, the reason that this is good for casual players is that some of the most powerful crafts available in the game deterministically require the investment of Exalted Orbs. So this is things like the Mastercraft that allows items to have multiple crafted mods on them, the top tier of physical damage modifiers, the top tier of cast speed, the top tier of attack speed. All these sorts of very, very powerful effects require raw Exalted Orbs and don't accept anything else. And these are the sort of thing that don't go on a 400 Exalt item, but do go on a 6 Exalt item. The sort of thing that is forever gear for a more casual player, but that would only be a stepping stone for a power gamer. And I think anything that makes the stepping stone gear for power gamers, which is the forever gear for more casual players, making that more accessible is a good thing. And additionally, if you play a lot, let's say that if you're the sort of player that runs 5,000 maps in a league, in that case, you're not very much affected by variance, at least on Exalted Orb drops. You can pretty reliably expect, if you run 5,000 maps, that you will get approximately 30 exalts in raw currency drops. Now, obviously, some players in this category are going to get unlucky and get 24. Other players are going to get very lucky and get 38. But about 30 is going to be the typical amount that you'll get. However, if you're a casual player, instead of running 5,000 maps all league, you might run 500. In this case, your expected number of exalts to drop as pure exalts is going to be something of the order of 3. Now, if you are lucky, then you might end up getting 7 in those 500 maps. But if you're unlucky, you can get 0. And actually, quite a large number of players will run their 500 maps and will not see a single pure exalt drop. So having that, having the currency value diversified across a broader variety of currencies, and particularly ones that drop in higher quantities than Exalted Orbs, I feel is a good thing for more casual players. So I think that the economic changes, and these have all been predictable consequences of of the synthesis mechanics. The shift of value away from exalts and towards annulment orbs, towards divine orbs, although that hasn't really been realized yet, and towards things like orbs of scouring and Val orbs. These are all things that are extremely positive for more casual players. I will note, though, once more, that the last few days have been pretty tumultuous in undoing these changes, and I'm not entirely sure what's going on there. However, this video was about the 9 things that sabotage the Synthesis League, so let's actually get onto that now, having spent 17 minutes talking about the positives of the league. So firstly, the league was just released unfinished. Until patch 3.6.3, which, according to my recollection, came about the 20th day of the league, many of the most interesting crafts were flat out not available. So that's the sort of crafts that required essences to access. Many of these were flat out not available by any means. This included both extremely powerful crafts, like the more deterministic ways of getting Onslaught on boots, the various all sorts of shenanigans with chaos damage on bows and things like that. All sorts of mechanics like this were not available for 20 days. Now you got to think that the most influential people in the community tend to be the people that get through the content the quickest, and these people were the most disappointed that this stuff was all not available. It really poisoned the well against synthesis crafting and especially fractured item crafting, which is something that will be fantastic in the first few days of a league. You know, you're running through, you happen to fluke an item that has a locked in. Maybe you're not lucky enough to get Merciless or Tyrannical on a weapon, but maybe you get Cruel, the 3rd tier of percentage physical damage, or maybe you get Dictators, the top tier of hybrid physical damage and accuracy percentage. What do? You go and you pull out your Essences of Contempt and your Essences of Zeal, and you smash them on it, and you end up creating something that is maybe not an absolute masterpiece that you'll use for the whole league, but that it will be something really impressive. In any case, this really gave a bad first impression to the league, and I think it was just a case that the call should have been made to delay the launch for a full week at this point, in order to get 3.6.3 out at release. And the decision not to do that really, really did hurt things. The second point that I want to make is that the decay mechanic inside Memory Fragments, and to a lesser extent inside the Nexus, is random, and failing due to making a wrong prediction of how the decay will propagate throughout the map. Feels like I'm someone who used to play Nintendo games back in the 1980s on the classic NES, and you could tell the difference between the better platform games like Super Mario Brothers and the less well-crafted ones by the fact that in the better games you would not have blind jumps where you needed to make a decision about where to jump without information on where you would be landing. And ultimately, once you learnt the game, you would memorize these decisions that you needed to make. And so you would make your jump, and then you would succeed or fail based upon a decision that you made that was totally blind. Players hated these blind jumps because when you failed, it wasn't due to your own agency, it was due to the developers not doing their job properly and indicating what you should do. And now, okay, most of these blind jumps became completely avoidable. In the games that had them, they became completely avoidable when you had advanced knowledge of the game. But then it's not apparent on first impressions. And the fact that with the decay, the fact that you fail zones due to decay, based upon decisions you make blindly in the first 2 or 3 seconds of that zone, creates a really feel-bad moment, but it's one that conjures up a very bad first impression for the league. Because I think almost everyone's first experience with a memory fragment inside a map is failing because they're like, oh, what does this do? What does this do? Oh, I've just been eaten by this decay. I saw it coming about 100 milliseconds before it got me, and boom, I failed. The third point that I wanted to make, so that's the second point. Decay was too random. And I've actually got some suggestions on how that would be fixed, because I do want to see the synthesis content go into the core game in the future, but I think it needs major work on it. Whereas something like Incursion, which I actually think had less potential and more problems with it initially than the Synthesis League has. Incursion was ready to go core straight away without major changes. I mean, it had changes, but it didn't need massive ones. I think that the decay mechanic needs to be changed before this can go core. Third point that I want to make is that the synthesis nexus, so talking about the memory nexus specifically, not the memory fragments you encounter in maps, but the location that you go to connect them to each other. This is at least as complex to understand and to grok as the Delve mine, but it's only about as rewarding as maps. Now with Delve, whether you like Delve or not, the rewards in it are so high that you feel compelled to run it. This is its own problem, and actually I think the underlying problem here is that Delve wasn't nerfed enough in terms of its loot payouts. And you can see that if we jump into the the values of gilded sulfite, polished sulfite, and rusted sulfite scarabs, the fact that people are willing to pay so much for these scarabs indicates that whilst most people would not see a good return on their 75 chaos if they buy a gilded sulfite scarab and then go and run a few delve zones, there are enough players that have found ways to make an absolute fortune out of the delve mines that that it is actually lucrative to buy, not just to buy one of them at 75, but for people to buy 50 of them at 75, go and run them all, and sell all of the loot for enough to then buy another 90 sulfite scarabs later on. So yeah, Delve is extraordinarily rewarding. Synthesis has the same complexity as Delve, in my opinion, at least the memory nexus, but without the extraordinary rewards that can both encourage people to learn it and in ways compel you to. I actually don't think that the Nexus is as complicated to understand as Betrayal. The Nexus itself is fairly simple. The complexity of the Synthesis League is in the synthesis crafting, but the rewards from it are not so high that people feel that it's worth getting over that initial learning curve. So that's my third point. Its synthesis is as complex as Delve. Oh, sorry, the Nexus is as complex as Delve but only about as rewarding as maps. And consequently, people don't put in the investment to get over that learning curve, and therefore they just find it, unintuitive, complex, and boring. Fourth up, the naive use of the synthesizer does not get you any useful results. And this all comes down to first impressions again. If you have a look through the list of implicits, and there are 2,275 rows in between these two tables together, and not very many people that can explain exactly how they all work. But if you just go through and pick out a few random implicits, so I'm just going to do that. What do we got here? 3 to 4% increased damage per endurance charge. That's the first thing I picked out at random. Let's go this one. 23 to 26% increased attack damage. Hey, that's actually not too bad. And 8% chance to ignite. That's the first three things that I found just by scanning through it at random. These do not actually make for particularly compelling items on their own. And I'm just going to apologize. I'm just recovering from a nasty cold, so I've got a bad cough coming on. Sorry, I'm wearing a headset, and that one could not quite completely take it off. Now, so your first impressions of using the synthesizer are going to be terrible. Why don't you contrast this to naive use of delve fossils? If you're a player that takes item level 27 gloves that you find while you're leveling, and you smash those with a frigid fossil, there is a pretty good chance you will craft a somewhere between solid and magnificent set of leveling gloves that will have a really powerful mod, explicit mod on them that adds a lot of cold damage to both your spells and your attacks. This is not what I would term an optimized use of your frigid fossil. It's a naive use, and it's far from what a power gamer might do with that fossil. But it gives you some pretty solid results. Fundamentally, I think complexity as a prerequisite for excellence is a good thing, but complexity as a prerequisite for mediocre results is not. And, I dug deep into the system, and I still made mistakes early on, and that's despite reading the, this first data mine table, which has 24 rows, nothing particularly intimidating, and then this second one that has 2,251. That's a total of 2,275 rows of data that I read in their entirety, and I still was making mistakes after doing that. And if you want to have a bit of a laugh at me, there's a video that I put up where I was attempting to craft a dagger with a mod similar to that found on Hand of Wisdom in Action, and I did not understand the way that the system worked, and wound up unintentionally crafting a dagger that rewards instacking in a different way via spell damage. And yeah, it's the number of people that I find posting on Reddit that have misunderstandings about how the system works that are perfectly reasonable misunderstandings, but they're absolutely insistent that their understanding of how the system works is right. This is actually really quite incredible. So yeah, the problem with the synthesizer is that naive use of it, basically complexity is not a prerequisite for excellence like it is with other crafting systems. It is a prerequisite even for mediocre results, and that's a problem. Now, the fifth item that I want to raise as a problem that undermined the Synthesis League has nothing to do with synthesis at all, but has become a really serious issue during it. And this is not something I experienced myself at all. I have a solid state drive, so this doesn't affect me. And, solid state drive, and at least I don't run on a beast of a computer, but it's powerful enough that it meets the minimum specs for VR setups like the Oculus Rift and HTC Vive. So it's quite a bit ahead of what Path of Exile requires. But this is Betrayal lag. Now, Betrayal lag is when intervention spawns in your map, and players that use an old school hard drive, mechanical hard drive rather than a solid state drive, or players that have got low-end computer systems, and sometimes some people that don't fit either of those categories are reporting it as well. They just experience extreme frame rate drops that result in them dying. Now, because intervention is in 8% of your maps, this ends up putting pretty much a hard cap on those players at about level 95 or 96. They can't really advance past that via mapping at all, and that's assuming they're in softcore. If they're in hardcore, they've probably quit the league already. Now, this does not affect every player. It only affects players that have got low spec and maybe medium spec systems. And I think that GGG may have a position that people that have low and medium spec computer systems aren't that big of a priority, because they presumably and quite likely accurately predict that those people are lower spend people on microtransactions. So I don't think they've prioritized this as much as they have, as much as they should have. However, it's completely ruined the league experience for a large minority of players, and that ends up, like, some of those people end up influencing others, and ultimately it is too big a section of the game population to ignore. I also think there's a pretty obvious fix to this, like a band-aid. This doesn't solve the overall problem, but it's something that would be a really effective band-aid fix, and that would be to make Betrayal members, so Immortal Syndicate members that are in intervention, or that spawn with an intervention encounter, make them be significantly weaker if they have 0 or 1 stars. So, if you level them up to level 2 or 3, then yeah, you get no mercy. But if you're encountering, say, you've got Haku in intervention and he's only rank 1, and he pulls Elrion along with him, they should be considerably nerfed in that fight, unless you have gone out of your way to choose to execute Haku a few times so that he becomes beefier and becomes a higher level. That would give a way for players to largely opt out of the intervention side of the Immortal Syndicate, and I think that this would solve the vast majority of problems that people have with the Immortal Syndicate lag. As I say, I don't experience this myself, but it clearly affects enough players that it's a real problem. Now, the sixth one that I'm going to comment on is, this is going to be really controversial, but I think the bosses were the bosses of the synthesis encounters were too easy at release. Now, GGG saw that players weren't feeling that they needed to get better in order to beat these boss encounters, that they were just stomping all over them. And so they came up with a half-assed response that I think was even worse than leaving them too easy, and that was to then go and have the bosses inherit the mods of the area that they're in. Now, this made the bosses an appropriate challenge in some cases, but some of those mods completely break the boss encounters. Coverage mods such as area of effect, multiple projectiles, and projectiles chain should not exist on boss fights unless the boss fights have been balanced around those those effects existing. So you think of how some of the various map bosses that you encounter, such as if you've ever run Core Malachi with 100% increased area of effect for monsters on the map, you'll know that the fight is incredibly harder than it is normally. And especially if you have both of the AoE mods. The Phoenix Guardian is the same. If you get the Phoenix Guardian and he has the mod that gives 100% increased area to all monsters in the entire zone, and then additionally the boss-specific mod that gives, from memory, I believe it's 70% AoE and 100% to... I'm trying to think, is it... no, it's AoE and something else. There's a map mod that does that as well, that only applies to the boss. If you get these two together, then the Phoenix or Core Malachite just become absolutely ridiculous. Likewise, if I remember correctly, the Rigwald boss, who's already, in my opinion, the most difficult map boss in the game as it is, this is in Dark Forest, he becomes really terrifying if he's got the if you've got the map has a vulnerability curse, because you don't get very many flask recharges in the fight, and in addition, if the map has the turbo mod on it, so that you can't really get away as easily from the points that you have to just run away from him. So those bosses scale up quite nicely with map mods. However, with those maps, you have the option, if you roll up a Dark Forest and then you wind up with vulnerability on it, and you've only got one immune to curse flask, and so you're not confident you can keep it going the whole fight, you've got the option of trading that map to someone else that can beat it. With the synthesis bosses, some of the mods make them basically unbeatable, and others make the fights, just basically a game of laser tag, where or rocket tag, where if the mob hits you once, you're dead. I feel here that this is a case of the content being released unfinished, and that the bosses should always have different mods to trash. I think climactic bosses, like the Cortex, should kick your ass a few times, like Uber Elder used to do for me, really until this league. This is the first league I've ever farmed Uber Elder. Or as Cruel Malachi did back in the days of Awakening, or as Innocence did with the first time that I played through Fall of Oriath. I got my ass handed to me by Innocence, but that inspired me to get better, and then to come back and get revenge. And then there's this amazing feeling when a boss has beaten you once, twice, 5 times, and then you come back and you finally beat them. So the bosses should feel difficult, but they should have their own mods, which should not be the same as the trash monsters. And like some of the things that come to mind, the numbers on the bosses. So on the monsters deal additional damage as cold. This is the sort of mod that for trash monsters, for you to even feel that is there on trash monsters, it has to be 80% or higher. If a monster's hitting you for 600 points of physical damage, it needs to be doing 600 physical plus at least 480 cold for you to even notice it. And then you're not at risk of being chilled. You hardly notice that it's happening anyway. On a boss, however, if that boss is hitting you for 6,000 damage, then suddenly the difference between going from not having that mod to having it is that you are now going from being hit to being, from taking a survivable but savage hit to one that is a potential one-shot, and that also immediately is going to freeze you unless you've got pre-planned mitigations against freeze. That's because 4,800 cold damage plus 6,000 physical is it's too much of an increase from the base 6,000. So for that reason, I think that the elemental damage mods should have lower numbers. The casting, the various speed mods should definitely have lower numbers on bosses. There's a very good reason that our temporal chains effects have lower effects on bosses, and their own speed boost should be affected the same way. And yeah, basically there should be entirely different mods on the bosses. I think it would be entirely reasonable to have a Cortex that has 3 random mods on it, or even 6, but those 6 should not be pulled from the same mod pool as a normal zone. So that's my 6th point. Bosses were too easy at release, but the reaction to that was probably even worse than the status quo. Now, the 7th flaw with the league is the 10 memory limit. 10 zones is not enough. Mapping is something that, when players are engaged with mapping, they generally want to seriously chain it. Now, this isn't necessarily true of newer players, but for players that have been playing Path of Exile for a while, it's pretty standard to go, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to run 24 maps. Then at the end of that 24 maps, I'll take a break from mapping and I'll do some other things. I think that the Nexus should go core with a different structure entirely to the current, 10 memory limit and a bunch of reward nodes that populate over time, and you've got your memory amplifiers and the like. That's an entire different video, but I think in general there are too many diversions from mapping in the game at the moment that cannot be put off. And I think one of the things that you can see from this is the extremely, extremely low price of cartographer's sextants. You'll notice here that master cartographer's sextants are they've only just jumped up. Actually, they're now 3 chaos, but they're, in any case, they're about 20 milli exalts because they've been more stable against the exalt than against the chaos orb. They were master sextants were 20 milli exalts this league. Last league they were 27 to 30, and even then that was low for prices. The previous league before that, my recollection was them being sort of 45 milli exalts, which is 23 to the exalt sort of range. They're falling because players are instead feeling that they can't just sit down and go bang, 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 whole lot of maps at once. The 8th point that I want to make, and this is not synthesis specific, is that player power has increased to the point that player progress early in the league in terms of their character power is you outgrow the atlas faster than you acquire the maps that you need to progress through the atlas. This is why I believe maps felt too scarce early in the league, but are still too common late. So, at the moment we have, if we just jump into the prices of maps in the economy at the moment, we've got a situation where map prices are the lowest they have been except in the Harbinger League. So Harbinger League had had so many maps dropping that it was perfectly rational to run, to just buy Guardian maps and run them as white maps. So, we were just saying, you grab yourself a Maze of the Minotaur, you don't even transmute it and go, much less Elk and go, or chisel and Elk. You would just go, okay, I'm just going to stick that in the map device and run it as it is. And you could do that because the incredible access to the Beachhead unique map that was in that league and the incredible access to Harbinger orbs meant that you were just swimming in returns. Now, we don't have it to... map over sustain is not at the point that it was in Harbinger, but it is the closest it's ever been. And this has been, though, at the same time that maps felt too scarce early. So what was happening was that players would get into the Atlas of Worlds. They're running tier 7 maps. Their character has gotten so powerful so quickly that their character feels like they want to be doing tier 12s. And they're able to do them. If they get a tier 12 map drop via some means, they're able to do it, and they're able to do it at speed. However, they're being constrained by the fact that the entire map drop system is based around players spending a larger amount of time in low yellow maps than we need to now, at least for veteran players. Now, my opinion here is that maps were not ever too scarce in this league, although there were some changes made to map drop rates. I think that specifically the yellow map tiers were too scarce, and this then created a situation where players were saying that they were not sustaining maps. And, if you have a look at the prices now, again, I'm going to compare them to exalts, not to chaos orbs, because I think exalts are a more stable currency. Tier 16s in this league are 80 milli exalts, so 80 exalts is 1,000 tier 16 maps. Contrast this to Abyss League, where tier 16 maps were 150 milli exalts. And again, this is not at the extent of Harbinger, where they got as low as, say, 25, 30 milli exalts, but it's a really, really sharp change from historical precedent. We're seeing, as well as this, that players are now feeling that they're so powerful that lower red maps are no longer engaging. And this then means that players want to only run tier 16s. If we go back a few leagues, say, again, we'll take Abyss as an example here, your typical endgame player, and now here I'm I'm going to draw a line between your casual player, your casual end gamer, and your end gamer and your power gamer. Casual players are the sort of person that doesn't take down Act 10 Katava within the first 4 weeks of a league. So that's their primary league goal is to get Act 10 Katava down, or maybe they get that down reasonably quickly, but they don't get Eternal Labyrinth down. Casual endgamer is the sort of player that gets into maps, runs several dozen maps, but does not run many hundreds. Typical endgamers are the sort of player that may run several hundred maps, and then power gamers are the sort of player that can amass a few dozen exalts, runs thousands of maps, and I say thousands with no sense of no hyperbolic sense of using the word thousand. I actually mean they run thousands and thousands of maps. They probably have already completed the Synthesis Map Grind Challenge, and they're probably many of these players will already have their 36 of 40 or their 40 of 40 if that's their goal. The casual endgamer found that they didn't understand all of the map sustain strategies that exist in the game, and so they got stuck on maps. They ran out of maps before they hit a wall where their character felt, oh, I can't go any further because the monsters are beating me. The more typical endgamer was feeling that I know a bunch of map sustain strategies, but I'd rather not use them. I'd rather just ignore that crap and just chain maps. And they couldn't achieve that. Whereas the power gamers were using all the map sustain strategies, and then were selling maps even before the increase in drop rates. They were selling maps in order to fund Headhunters, Mirrors of Kalandra, all sorts of other expensive purchases. And like early on in the league, I was selling an ungodly amount of tier 10, 11, and 12 maps, all of which I got through running the running maps with Zana's mods on them. So I'd put a tier 5 in the map device and open up a tier 10 instead by paying 2 Chaos Orbs. And then I'd receive drops of tier 9, 10, 11, and 12 maps, and I'd then turn around and sell them to other players. There were people who were more power gamers than me were doing this with putting a tier 10 map into the device and opening up a tier 15 using the top tier Zana Shaper map mod. So, player progress is faster than the economic progress through the Atlas, and this causes a feel-bad moment where you feel compelled to run map tiers. You feel compelled to spend too much time in lower tier maps, or you have to trade for maps. And trading for maps, we're about to get onto the worst problem with the league, the ninth one and the one that I've left for last, and that relates to trade. Trading in this game is a miserable experience, and you need to do it if you don't understand all of the advanced strategies for map sustain. So let's get on to the 8th issue there is that players outgrow yellow maps before they have enough red maps, before they have been able to acquire enough red maps. I actually think the solution here is increasing the monster level of all maps by 2. So that would mean that what's currently a tier 9 map would then have the monsters from tier 11 maps in it. And this would mean that players would actually feel compelled to spend a bit more time in the earlier tiers of maps, not because they're out of maps, but because they need to get stronger in order to advance. Not because they need to acquire more maps in order to advance. But the final point that I want to make, and I think that of the 9 things that sabotage synthesis, this is the worst of them, and that is trading. Synthesis, the synthesis mechanics of synthesizing items are absolutely and completely dependent upon trade. I've made several videos on how to do various crafts that can be at various times can be quite profitable, quite lucrative, and it can give you some very accessible, powerful gear. The problem though is that trading requires interacting with players at like at times that are very inconvenient for the other player if they're involved in natural gameplay. This then encourages that player to ignore you, and this then just creates so much bad blood within the community. We have a non-binding sell order system at the moment, where you list up an item saying, this is what I want to sell, this is the price I want for it, and then players can say, yes, I want to take you up on that. But unlike a system like, pretty much any real world marketplace, they are not actually bound to that price. So, imagine that you go to your local supermarket. I'm in Australia, so I'll use the name Coles. But if you're in the United States, you might think Walmart. If you're somewhere else, you may think of somewhere else. Imagine they've sent out a catalogue and they're saying that they're going to be selling a particular product, let's say a 6-pack of beer, for $6. Now, in Australia, that would be ridiculously cheap price. It's normal. Normally, you pay anywhere from $10 as a bargain, $17 is more typical for a 6-pack of beer. That's Australian dollars. So you see that they're advertising it for $6. You're excited. You make a specific trip to that supermarket, choosing to go there instead of going to the other ones that are selling similar products. You get there and then, oh yeah, no, sorry. We don't actually mean that $6. We can sell you it for $19. How's that sound? This obviously, in the real world, that's illegal in most places. It certainly would be illegal here. If Coles were to do that, they would get into a fair bit of legal trouble. A non-binding sell order system reward toxic players and punish natural play. And this issue is problematic in every league, but because Synthesis has extreme requirements to find bad items that have specific niche mods on them, this has made a bad system awful in this league. And you can tell that trade in this game has problems by the number of people that enthusiastically champion the various cheaters that use trade bots. Now, I actually don't think trade bots are as widespread as people on Reddit tend to indicate that they believe they are. But in any case, the fact that people enthusiastically defend the cheats that use these botting softwares, this sort of botting software, is because those players actually honour the prices that they advertise and they trade quickly. This is a real problem. Now, in normal leagues, it's manageable. You have to get over a hurdle of acquiring maps early in the league. But once you've done that, generally you'll over-sustain. You'll find a point, a map tier at which you can farm comfortably. You're over-sustaining that tier. And every now and again you'll sell an item that is either a very good item you found or that is a mediocre item that fits someone's narrow niche perfectly. But in this league, the way that trading works has seriously messed up the feel of Synthesis. So if I'm going to go and do a trade search now, and this is not an actual search for items that I really want to buy, but that's the wrong site. I meant to go to poe.trade. It's funny, for fractured items I find poe.trade superior to the GGG website. For everything else I find that the GGG trade website is better. But anyways, let's just load up poe.trade, which is normally a lot faster than this. And we're going to look for hubris circlets. This is something that I have searched for before I have searched for this exact thing before in order to make a specific craft. So what I'm looking for is 2 locked hubris circlets that have fire resist and cold resist. Actually, I've made a mistake there. These should be the fractured versions of these. If I can find that. I can't seem to find it. So in that case, I'll just start with them being, without insisting on them being fractured, because I know then how to look for them. So now I'm going to search for, so we've got this here, Dragon Keep Hubris Circlet. Someone's selling for 45 chaos. That's the first item. Blighthorn Hubris. Someone's selling it for 80 chaos. Gee, these have gone up since I made my last video. There's this one here, which is item level 85, which is nice, and the person's asking an Exalt for it. This person's AFK, although their item would have sufficed. That's just fire resist, and that's the end of it. So you see that I found 3 with online sellers. If I was to send messages to these 3 people, in my experience, 2 of them will respond, and 1 won't, on average. This is a real problem because the way that that synthesis crafting works, it's all or nothing. You need all 3 of the items, otherwise you can't do anything with them. And so this ends up being an absolutely miserable system to navigate when it comes to operating it with trade. Now, I think synthesis should go into the core game, and I'll have another video on this, but not with the requirement for trade. To give an idea as to just how ugly this system is, I made a video on appraising fractured items that ended up being so long that it blew out to 57 minutes because there's so many details in it. And even, I think someone even that had a concise rather than a conversational communication style probably couldn't have done that video in less than half an hour. I want to contrast this sort of player interaction, the trade-based player interaction, to more positive player interaction that we've had in the past. Think of the old master system, or even of current bestiary scarab rotations or Nico scarab rotations. In the bestiary and Nico scarab rotations, players cooperate. So players interact in a cooperative sense. Trading, however, is by its definition a zero-sum real loss PvP scenario. And these are the times that you wind up with all sorts of toxic behavior. It's entirely possible, of the 3 fire and cold resist helmets that I picked out here, it is entirely possible that one or more of these is not listed by a person intending to sell it, but is listed solely to cause other players to undercut their price. So, you know, for instance, I'm not accusing the owner of this Dragon Keep Hubris Circlet of anything at all, but it is entirely possible that this player will not respond to a tell saying, I want to buy your 45 Chaos Hubris Circlet. It's entirely possible that their response will be to silently change their price to an Exalt. It's entirely possible that their response will be to completely ignore me, and then if I was to put up a similar item at 40 Chaos, to then immediately try and buy it. And one of the reasons that the current trading system is so good at encouraging this this sort of toxic environment of fake sell orders, you know, fake advertisements. And once more, I'm not accusing any of these people of doing this. It's common in the community, but I don't know that these players are responsible for it. One of the things that makes it so effective, or so much of a problem, is that trade abuse is so scalable. You can go from 3 to 6 exalts via various antisocial trade tricks, or you can use the same effort pretty much to go from 10. If you've got 10 exalts to start with, you can end up with 15. You know, so you end up, the more that you invest, the larger your absolute magnitude of profit is. That's really problematic because it means that a small number of players that are utterly ruthless can do a lot of damage to to the whole community with trade. So basically, I feel that if synthesis goes core, It either needs to be alongside an entire overhaul of trading that gets rid of the non-binding sell order system we have at the moment and replaces it with something else. I've got some ideas on that, but that would be an entire other video. And GGG have always had a cautiously approach to that, because it is a can of worms, and if it's done wrong, it will do more damage than help. Or alternately, the synthesizer itself should go, and synthesized items should be created via an entirely different means. Anyways, so I'm just going to summarize, because this video has gone, I sort of wrote out my notes thinking, oh yeah, this will be 20 minutes, and it's already gone for an hour. I'm just going to summarize everything at this point and say that I've enjoyed this league. I like the breach-like zones that it's had in it. I've liked the fact that there's durable rare monsters. I've liked the increased top-end complexity of crafting and increased ways of interacting with crafting. And I've liked the economic changes that it's caused. But that this league released unfinished, and it has really suffered for it. That the nature of decay has caused a bad first impressions for a lot of players. The league is as complex as Delve, but not as rewarding, which means that it does not seem worth learning all of these complex new systems in a way that it did for something like Betrayal. Naive use of the synthesizer doesn't get useful results, and this is a real problem. And I think that the lower end of the implicits should be improved markedly, just as the low end use of Delve fossils is generally very good. Betrayal lag has been a killer for this league, something that really has to be fixed as a matter of urgency, even though it doesn't affect me. The bosses were a schmozzle. They were too easy at release. Then they were changed in very unsatisfying ways, and they really should have had a week more of testing. The 10 memory limit is bad. It stops you from getting into a solid rhythm of mapping. Player progress is faster than their economic progress through the Atlas now. This has been becoming a problem for some leagues, and this league, it's become a real hot button issue. But I don't think that the solution was increasing map drops. I think that's actually had its own problems that have been in many cases worse than if the if the status quo had played out. And lastly, that this league's requirement to extensively engage in trade in order to get much out of the synthesizer has broken the already stretched and fractured trading system in this game. Anyways, if you've got any comments, questions, disagreements, rants, feel free to comment them below. Otherwise, have a good one.